The first time I saw the photos, I thought it was a mistake. My cousin Amanda had always been like a sister to me. Growing up, we shared summers on the same porch, made paper crowns out of cereal boxes, and promised we'd never grow apart no matter what adulthood threw at us. But adulthood, I've learned, keeps its own promises. The picture showed up on my phone one Friday evening, the golden hour light spilling over her white dress, the sun reflecting off the rented ballroom in Charleston where the entire family stood beaming. Aunts, uncles, cousins, even distant relatives I hadn't seen since middle school, all there. Everyone, except me. At first, I scrolled slowly, half expecting to see a message somewhere in the thread. Maybe an oversight, a last-minute invitation that got lost in the mail. But there was nothing. Just a carousel of perfect images. Amanda laughing under a floral arch, my mother smiling beside her, my sister's kids tossing petals in the air. And then came the caption, "Surrounded by everyone who matters most." Those 5 words landed harder than they should have. Everyone who matters most. I reread it again and again, as though repetition might change the meaning. My name wasn't on the guest list. My face wasn't in the crowd. I wasn't even a ghost in the background. I didn't matter. I called my mother. She didn't pick up. I texted my sister. She read the message, then nothing. Just the gray silence of delivered, seen, ignored. That silence said more than words ever could. That night, I poured myself a drink and sat on the couch, scrolling through years of memories. Old birthday photos, family reunions, my father's funeral. I tried to pinpoint the exact moment I became an outsider in my own bloodline. Maybe it wasn't a moment. Maybe it was a slow fade, the kind that happens quietly while you're busy convincing yourself that love doesn't keep score. My mother called back the next morning. Her voice was too cheerful. "Isuat Farat. How are you? Did you forget to tell me something?" I asked. A pause. About what? About Amanda's wedding. Oh, another pause, longer this time. I'm going to call you about that. It was complicated. Complicated? I repeated. Everyone was there, Mom. It was a small venue, she said quickly. They couldn't invite everyone. I laughed bitterly. They invited your bridge partner, Mom. And her cat has its own Instagram page. Her sigh trembled over the line. You know how these things go, David. Amanda wanted to keep things drama-free. Drama-free? I said, what drama? Don't do this, she whispered. Please. And then she hung up. That silence again. Heavy. Familiar. I stared at my phone, realizing that what hurt most wasn't the exclusion itself. It was how normal it felt. I've been edged out of this family in slow increments, small enough that no one noticed until the door finally closed. I spent the weekend avoiding social media, but the world has a way of showing you what you don't want to see. Friends kept tagging me in photos, asking if I was at that gorgeous wedding. I deleted each tag quietly, one by one. On Sunday, my neighbor Mr. Clark knocked on my door. "Saw your family on TV," he said. Channel 6 was covering that fancy wedding downtown. "Your cousin married that banker, right?" "Yeah," I said softly. "That's her." "Good for her," he said. "She's got quite the family. You must be proud." I smiled weakly. "Yeah, proud." After he left, I sat in the quiet again. The truth is, pride wasn't what I felt. It was something darker, something like grief. Not for a person, but for a version of life I thought I still belonged to. That evening, I opened my old photo album, the real one, the one with bent pages and faded edges. There was Amanda at 12, standing beside me on my 14th birthday, frosting smeared on her nose. In one picture, she'd written across the back, "We'll always be family, no matter what." I traced the words with my thumb. They felt like a lie now. The next day, I called my aunt, Amanda's mother. She answered on the third ring, her tone polite but distant. "David, what a surprise. I just wanted to say congratulations," I said. The pictures were beautiful. "Oh, thank you, sweetheart," she said, relief in her voice. "It was a wonderful day. I noticed I wasn't there," I said. A long pause followed, the kind that rearranges the air. "Well," she said carefully, "Amanda thought it might be uncomfortable. With everything that happened with your dad." I froze. My dad's been gone for 10 years. I know, but there were financial matters, you know. Old tensions. Tensions. I repeated. "You mean the inheritance?" Her silence was confirmation enough. My father had left a modest inheritance, a lake house, some savings, a few investments. I'd been the executor of his will. Amanda's father had been disappointed that things didn't go his way. That was a decade ago. I thought it was behind us. Apparently, the family ledger doesn't clear with time. Anyway, my aunt continued quickly, I'm sure Amanda still cares about you deeply. Sure, I said. Deeply enough not to send an invitation. David, don't make this harder than it needs to be. I didn't, I said. You did. She sighed, murmured something about errands, and hung up. That night, I couldn't sleep. The ceiling fan whirred overhead, casting slow-moving shadows across the room. I thought about how people rewrite history to make themselves comfortable, how my absence from that wedding would eventually become a story they told differently. Maybe I was busy, maybe he didn't want to come, maybe it was mutual. They'd patch the narrative until it no longer hurt their conscience. But I'd remember. I always would. By Tuesday, the world had moved on. The wedding photos were still getting likes. The family group chat I wasn't in was no doubt buzzing with post-wedding stories, and I was still here, unchanged, unseen. It wasn't anger that took root in me that week. It was something quieter, more dangerous, a longing for understanding. I didn't want revenge. Not then. I just want to know why. Why the people who had once held my hand through childhood storms could so easily pretend I didn't exist. But the thing about why is, it's never as clean as you hope. When you start digging for reasons, you find bones buried in every direction. I was about to start digging. There's a strange kind of loneliness that comes from realizing the people who raised you never truly saw you. Not in the ways that matter. They saw your manners, your grades, your behavior, but not your fears, not the quiet ache that grows between family dinners and forced smiles. That week after Amanda's wedding, the ache in me grew into something solid, something that followed me from room to room like a ghost. On Wednesday, I went to visit my mother. Her house sat on the same street where I'd grown up, a one-story home with peeling shutters and flower beds. She still tended like they could fix everything that had wilted inside her. I hadn't been there in months. The front door was unlocked, like always. She was in the kitchen, washing dishes with the TV on low volume. The local news anchor's voice blended with the hum of running water. When she saw me, she froze for a second, then forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. David, you could have called. I did, I said quietly. You didn't answer. Her hands trembled as she set down a plate. I've been busy. You know how it is. Busy avoiding me? She flinched slightly. Don't start. I'm not starting anything, I said. I just want to understand. How did everyone go to Amanda's wedding and not one person think I should be there? She wiped her hands on a towel, turning her back to me. It's complicated. That's what everyone keeps saying, I said. So explain it to me. She sighed, shoulders heavy. It's not about you. Then what is it about? It's about peace, she said finally, turning around. Your uncle didn't want things to feel tense. Amanda didn't either. You know how sensitive she is. With your father's estate. There is again, I interrupted. My father's estate. That's what this is really about, isn't it? Her silence was confirmation. I've been 23 when my father died. I was the one who found him in his chair, the television still flickering faintly in front of him. The will came later, and with it, resentment. My uncle had assumed he'd inherit the lake house, but my father left it to me instead. He said it was because I saw beauty where others saw inconvenience. My uncle called it betrayal, and now, 10 years later, that bitterness had found its way into a wedding guest list. I didn't choose this, I said quietly. I know, she said, but you're part of it whether you like it or not. You carrying your father's name doesn't make it easier for them to forgive. Forgive what? I asked. That I existed? Her eyes softened, but she didn't answer. The kettle whistled suddenly, sharp and high-pitched. She turned off the stove, poured 2 cups of tea, and handed me one. We sat across from each other at the kitchen table. It felt strange, like visiting a museum exhibit of my own childhood. The chipped mug I'd painted in 3rd grade still sat on the shelf, behind her. The same tablecloth, the same curtains. Everything was frozen in time, except us. After a long silence, she said, You always took things to heart, David. You feel things too deeply. I smiled bitterly. And everyone else doesn't feel enough. She looked tired. We can't change people. We can only try to keep the peace. I sipped the tea, bitter without sugar. Peace built on silence isn't peace, Mom. It's surrender. Her lips tightened, but she didn't argue. That was her way. Avoid confrontation. Pretend time fixes everything. But time doesn't heal what's left to fester. It just teaches you how to hide it better. When I left her house, the air outside felt heavier. The sun was setting, bleeding orange through the trees, and I stood in the driveway for a long time, watching it fade. The neighborhood looked the same, but it didn't feel like home anymore. Driving back, I passed the community center where our family used to hold reunions. I could almost hear the laughter spilling out from the past. My father flipping burgers on the grill, Amanda sneaking cupcakes before dinner, my uncle bragging about his new business. Back then, I thought family meant forever. Now I understood it meant something closer to until it's inconvenient. That night, I dug through my father's old boxes in the attic. The air was thick with dust, the wooden floor creaking beneath me. I found photo albums, tax records, handwritten letters, pieces of a life I was still trying to understand. In one folder marked estate. Personal notes, I found something strange. A letter addressed to my uncle, dated a month before my father's death. It wasn't sealed, so I opened it. Dear Paul, if you're reading this, it means I've decided to let the lawyers handle what I could never explain face to face. The house goes to David because he sees it the way I do. Not as property, but as memory. I hope one day you understand. What you did all those years ago hurt me more than I ever said, but I can't carry it anymore. I forgive you. I just can't forget. There was no signature at the bottom, just his initials, HM. I read it 3 times, trying to make sense of the words. What you did all those years ago. What had my uncle done? What wound was my father still carrying when he died? I placed the letter on my desk and stared at it for a long while. If my father had forgiven him, why hadn't the family moved on? Unless there was something deeper. Something my father never told me. I called my sister that night. She picked up after a few rings, her voice hesitant. David, I found a letter from Dad, I said, to Uncle Paul. She was quiet. Did you know about it? No, she said quickly. What did it say? That he forgave him. But for what? A long silence stretched on the line. Then she said, David, maybe you should just let it go. It's been years. I can't let go of something I don't understand. Her tone turned cold. Sometimes understanding only makes things worse. Maybe, I said, but being ignored makes it unbearable. She exhaled softly. I can't do this right now. Before I could reply, she hung up. For a long time, I sat in that quiet again. The same kind of quiet that used to mean safety, but now felt like exile. Families have a way of turning truth into poison. The more you dig, the sicker you feel. But even then, I couldn't stop. I thought about Amanda, her white dress, the caption, everyone who matters most. Maybe she hadn't meant it cruelly. Maybe she'd inherited the silence that ran through our family like a second language. But silence, I was learning, was just another form of cruelty, one that lets wounds fester until they start to rot. When I went to bed that night, the rain started to fall. Light at first, then steady, then heavy, like it had been waiting for permission. I lay there listening, feeling something in me finally shift. Maybe peace was never an option. Maybe what I wanted was truth, no matter how ugly it turned out to be. And I knew exactly where I'd start looking for it. By Friday morning, I'd already promised myself I wouldn't go anywhere near Charleston. The wedding had come and gone. What good would it do to stir the ashes? But promises made to pride are fragile things. By noon, I was already driving. The highway stretched out before me like a ribbon of regret. The sky was pale blue, the kind that makes you think the world can't possibly hold anything cruel under that much light. I drove past gas stations, cornfields, and rest stops that looked like memories, familiar but slightly wrong. The radio played soft country songs about family, forgiveness, and small-town roots, which felt more like mockery than comfort. I switched it off. The silence was better. I didn't tell anyone I was going. Not my mother, not my sister, not even myself until I was halfway there. It wasn't revenge that pulled me toward the city. It was something quieter, something like longing. I just wanted to see what they looked like together, to understand how easily I had been erased. The venue was an old riverside estate, a historic mansion often rented out for weddings. When I arrived, the gates were still open, a crew dismantling floral arches and folding tables into vans. The celebration was over, but the scent of champagne and roses still hung in the air, mingling with the salt breeze from the nearby water. I parked across the street and watched for a while. I saw my aunt directing the staff, her voice sharp, her posture proud. My uncle stood beside her, one hand in his pocket, the other gripping a phone he didn't seem to use. They looked tired, not the kind of tired that comes from dancing, but from keeping secrets. I stepped out of the car and walked toward the edge of the property. No one noticed me. They were too busy cleaning up what was left of someone else's joy. I kept my distance, moving through the garden that stretched behind the mansion. The grass was littered with confetti, wilted petals, and the occasional forgotten napkin. That's when I heard laughter. Amanda's laughter. I froze. She stood near the back terrace, still in her dress, but with her heels off, her bare feet pressing into the wet grass. Beside her was a man I didn't recognize, tall, tanned, with a loosened tie and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He wasn't her new husband. I'd seen his face in the pictures. This man was different. They spoke quietly, but the wind carried fragments of their words. "He doesn't know, does he?" the man asked. Amanda shook her head. "No, and he won't. Not unless someone tells him." "Your cousin always had a big mouth," he said. "He's not part of this anymore," she replied. The words cut through me. They talked about me as if I were a chapter in a book they'd already closed. My chest tightened. I took a step closer, hidden behind a tree, the bark rough beneath my palm. The man reached for her hand. "You really think this will stay buried?" She looked down. "It has for 10 years. I didn't need to hear more. 10 years, the same number that had passed since my father's death. I waited until they walked back inside before I moved. My hands were trembling. Part of me wanted to run, but another part, a quieter, colder part, knew I had just stumbled onto the edge of the truth. I walked around the back of the mansion, where the reception tent still stood half collapsed. A few workers were sweeping up broken glass and empty champagne flutes. One of them, a woman in her 50s, looked up as I passed. "You part of the family?" she asked. I hesitated. "Used to be," I said. She smiled faintly, then went back to work. "Then you should have been here. It was beautiful, like something out of a magazine. But folks like that," she shook her head. "They wear masks better than most." Her words lingered long after I left. I drove to the edge of town and parked near the river. The water was still, reflecting the soft gray of approaching dusk. I leaned against the railing, watching the current ripple gently against the rocks. Somewhere downstream, laughter echoed faintly from a boat. It sounded far away, almost unreal. My phone buzzed. It was a text from my sister. Jess, you didn't go down there, did you?" I stared at the screen for a long moment before typing back. "Me, I did." Her reply came quickly. Jess. "Oh, David, what did you do?" "Me, nothing. Yet." I turned off my phone and slipped it into my pocket. The last word hung heavy in my mind. Yet. I hadn't meant to type it. Maybe I didn't mean it at all, but maybe I did. That night, I checked into a small motel off the interstate. The room smelled faintly of bleach and loneliness. I lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying Amanda's words. "It has for 10 years. What secret had my father taken with him? What was so terrible that it could split a family clean down the middle and leave me standing on the wrong side?" Sleep came in fragments. I dreamed of my father sitting in that old wooden chair by the lake, staring at the water. He turned to me and said, "Some debts aren't paid with money, son. They're paid with silence." When I woke, the room was cold, the world dim with early morning light. I looked out the window and saw fog rolling over the highway, soft and shapeless. For the first time, I understood that I couldn't go back to pretending nothing was wrong. Families are good at rewriting history, but sometimes the truth refuses to stay buried. And if the truth was buried in the same soil that held my father's memory, I was ready to start digging with my bare hands. The morning after I overheard Amanda's words, I drove aimlessly along the coastal roads, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly they ached. The radio murmured soft jazz, but it felt intrusive, like someone whispering over a funeral. I turned it off. There was a chill in the air, the kind that doesn't belong to any season, just to certain days when the world seems colder because you finally understand how cruel it can be. I stopped by a diner off Highway 17, one of those roadside places that serve coffee so strong it could keep the dead awake. The waitress greeted me with the kind of polite exhaustion that comes from a long morning shift. "What'll it be?" she asked. "Just coffee," I said, in a quiet corner. She smiled faintly. "That I can do." I sat by the window, watching cars drift by like thoughts I couldn't catch. I kept replaying Amanda's voice, her tone when she said, "He doesn't know, does he?" And every time I heard it, something inside me twisted tighter. After an hour of sitting there, pretending to drink, I pulled out my phone. I hadn't checked messages since the night before. There were a few missed calls from my mother, one from my sister, and a single text from a number I didn't recognize. Unknown, we need to talk. Meet me at the lake house. Alone, no name, no context, but I didn't need either. The lake house, my father's house, was the center of everything that had ever gone wrong between us. I didn't hesitate. The drive there took 3 hours, but it felt shorter, like the road itself was pulling me towards something inevitable. The property sat hidden between clusters of tall pines, its reflection mirrored perfectly in the still water below. I hadn't been there in years, not since the funeral. The air smelled of pine, damp earth, and old wood. The front porch creaked under my weight as I stepped up to the door. It was already unlocked. Inside, dust floated lazily through beams of afternoon light. The furniture was covered in white sheets, ghosts of what once was. And then, from the back room, I heard footsteps. David. The voice belonged to my uncle. He looked older than I remembered, gray at the temples, heavier around the eyes, his tie loosened as though he'd been wearing it for days. He didn't seem surprised to see me. "I was wondering when you'd show up," he said. "You sent the message?" He nodded. "Amanda told me you were snooping around. Said you were asking questions." "I'm not snooping," I said. "I'm remembering." He gave a small, bitter laugh. "You think you want the truth, but you don't. Then tell me anyway." He walked past me, his shoes scuffing against the wooden floor. "Your father and I made a deal once, one that should have died with him. But since you've decided to dig up ghosts," he turned toward the window, looking out at the lake. "He wasn't the man you think he was, David. I'm not here for character assassinations," I said quietly. "You should be," he said, "because he made choices that hurt this family more than you'll ever know." I took a step closer. "What choices?" He turned to face me. "The land under this lake, it wasn't ours. It belonged to Amanda's mother's family. Your father invested in it with their money, promising to return it. But when things went wrong, he kept the deed. He told them it was payment for a debt. That's why your aunt and I lost everything. That's why you weren't invited." The words hit me like a physical blow. "That's not true," I whispered. He shrugged. "Believe what you want. But that house you're standing in, it was built on betrayal." I wanted to shout, to accuse him of lying, but the way he looked at me, half pity, half resentment, told me he believed every word. "I don't believe you," I said anyway. "My father wouldn't do that." "Then why did he write that letter?" My throat tightened. "What letter?" "The one where he said he forgave me," he said softly. "He wrote it because he knew I was right to hate him." I turned away, the room spinning slightly. The letter I'd found in my father's files suddenly felt heavier in my memory, its meaning warped by everything I was hearing. "You could have told me this years ago," I said. He nodded slowly. "And reopened wounds that never healed? We buried the past for a reason." "But you didn't," I said. "You passed it down. Amanda knew. You all did. You built your peace on silence." His expression hardened. "And what do you think you're doing now, David? Stirring up things that can't be fixed? You're just like him, always needing to be right." I took a step closer. "No, I need to be honest." He sighed, looking suddenly weary. "Honesty doesn't heal, son. It burns." He walked toward the door and stopped beside me. Leave it alone. For your own sake. You can't fix what's already drowned. And then he left. I stood there for a long time, listening to the creak of the floorboards fade away. Through the window, the lake shimmered under the late sun, calm and beautiful, deceptively so. I went to the old cabinet in the corner where my father used to keep his journals. Most were blank toward the end, but in one of them I found an entry dated a week before he died. If you're reading this, I'm sorry. I never meant for the truth to fall on you. The water hides many things, but not guilt. One day it will rise, and when it does, I hope you forgive me before it takes you too. The handwriting trembled toward the end, as though his hand had grown weak. I read it again and again, my heart pounding. The water hides many things, but not guilt. I walked outside to the lake, the wind rippling the surface in small circles. For years, this had been my sanctuary, the place I came to think, to breathe, to feel close to him. But now, standing there, I saw it differently. I saw a grave. The reflection of the house shimmered on the water like a mirage. I picked up a small stone and threw it hard, breaking the image. I don't know how long I stood there, but when the sun dipped behind the trees, I finally understood what my uncle meant. Some truths don't heal, they unravel. That night, I stayed at the house. I couldn't bring myself to leave. I sat by the fireplace, reading the letter again, then the journal entry, then the letter again, as though repetition could somehow make it less true. But it didn't. My father had hurt them. Maybe not out of greed, but out of pride. And pride, I was learning, was the one inheritance this family had truly passed down. By the time I fell asleep, the fire had burned low. In the half-light, the room felt smaller, heavier. I dreamt of water filling the house, creeping up the walls, whispering secrets through the cracks. And in the dream, my father's voice said one thing, over and over again. We all drown in what we refuse to face. The following morning arrived like a bruise, slow, dark, and sore to touch. I woke on the couch, my neck stiff from sleeping upright, my chest tight with the kind of exhaustion that doesn't come from lack of rest, but from knowing too much. Outside, the lake was quiet. Still, it shouldn't have been. The air had a heaviness to it, as though the sky itself was waiting for me to do something about what I'd learned. I sat up, rubbed my eyes, and stared at the scattered papers on the floor. The letter, my father's journal, the open folder that had started this descent. I should have felt relief for finally knowing the truth, but I didn't. I just felt hollow. For years, I had carried around a picture of my father as an honorable man, a man who did what was right even when it hurt. But that picture was gone now, replaced by something messy, something real. And yet, another thought gnawed at me. If my father had wronged them, why hide it behind smiles? Why invite the rest of the family to weddings and dinners and reunions while keeping me on the outside? I hadn't stolen anything. I was guilty only of his bloodline. That's when I decided I couldn't keep their silence for them any longer. I packed the papers into a folder, locked the lake house, and drove straight to my mother's home. She answered the door with a look that told me she already knew why I'd come. "David," she said softly, "please don't. I found Dad's journal." I interrupted. "And the letter. He did it, didn't he?" Her eyes filled with something I hadn't seen in years, shame. "Yes," she whispered. "He did. Why didn't you tell me?" "Because you were his son," she said. "You adored him. I couldn't take that from you." I clenched my fists. "You think it hurt less finding out now?" Tears welled in her eyes. "You think I didn't carry it too? You think it was easy living with the weight of what he did?" Her voice broke, and for the first time, I saw not my mother, the defender of all things family, but a woman who had been complicit in a lie for half her life. "You all could have talked to me," I said, my voice shaking. "Instead, you made me the villain in a story I didn't write." She wiped her face. "It wasn't meant to be like that. Your uncle, he lost everything. Your father thought he was protecting us. He didn't mean for it to become this. Then why was I punished?" Her lips trembled. "Because silence always needs a scapegoat." I left before she could say more. The drive to Amanda's house was a blur. I barely remember the turns, the red lights, the stretch of road. I just remember the way my heart thudded against my ribs, each beat louder than the one before. Her new home sat in one of those pristine suburban neighborhoods where every lawn looked airbrushed. I parked outside and saw her through the window, still in a white robe, her hair tied back, the kind of calm that made me furious. When she opened the door, her expression went cold. "David, what are you doing here?" "You knew," I said. "You knew what Dad did." She looked away. "I didn't want to hurt you." "Then why did you talk about me like I was some secret to bury?" Her eyes flicked up to mine, wide but defensive. "You weren't supposed to hear that." "But I did," I said, "and I heard everything I needed to." "David, no. You all pretended I was the problem, but it was never me. It was what my father left behind, wasn't it? That lake house, that land, his mistakes, it's all you ever saw when you looked at me." Her lips parted, but she didn't speak. "Do you know what it's like," I said, my voice trembling, "to wake up one day and realize your family had a whole world without you in it? A wedding, a celebration, laughter, all built on a lie you didn't even know existed?" Amanda's eyes softened. "You think this didn't hurt me too?" I laughed bitterly. "You wore white, Amanda. You got a new beginning. I got a ghost." Something in her expression cracked. "He ruined our family, David. All of us. My parents almost lost their home. My mother stopped speaking to yours for years. You think I didn't want to invite you? I did, but Dad said it would open old wounds. He said forgiveness wasn't yours to ask for. And you believed him?" She hesitated. "He's my father." I nodded slowly. "Yeah, and mine's dead. Maybe that makes it easier to blame him." We stood in silence for a long moment. The air between us felt like a drawn bowstring, tight, waiting to snap. Finally, I said, "You want to keep pretending this is peace? Fine, but I'm done carrying your guilt for you." I dropped the folder on her doorstep, the journal, the letter, the proof, and turned away. "David," she called after me, "what are you going to do?" I didn't look back. What you should have done years ago. I didn't go home. I went to the local paper instead. It was a small-town weekly that printed community stories, anniversaries, local scandals, small triumphs. The editor, an older man named Frank, had known my father. When I walked in his office and laid the folder on his desk, he looked at me for a long time before speaking. "You sure you want this out there?" "No," I said, "but it's already out here. I'm just giving it a name." He nodded, his eyes tired. "Truth costs more than people think, son." "I can afford it," I said, though my voice wavered. He picked up the papers and sighed. "I'll handle it." When I left the office, the sun was setting again. The sky was streaked with deep red, like a wound that refused to close. That night, I went back to the lake house one last time. The air was heavy with rain. I stood on the dock, watching the reflection of the clouds ripple on the water surface. For a moment, I thought I saw my father sitting in his chair again, head bowed, as if waiting for me to speak. I found out. I whispered, "And I'm sorry." Thunder rolled somewhere in the distance. The wind picked up. I closed my eyes and let it hit me, sharp and cold. For years, I'd wanted the truth. Now I had it. And it felt like grief all over again. I whispered into the darkness, "They'll hate me for this." And from somewhere deep inside, I thought I heard his voice answer, "Maybe, but at least they'll finally see you." The story broke 3 days later. It wasn't front-page news. It didn't need to be. In a town like ours, word travels faster than print. By the time the issue hit the stands, the whispers had already begun, in grocery aisles, in coffee shops, at church. People didn't need the full story. They only needed a headline. Local family feud resurfaces over hidden land deal. It sounded almost harmless, like an old dispute being rehashed for gossip. But the details, the names, the timeline, the lake house, told everyone exactly who it was about. The article didn't accuse anyone outright, but it didn't have to. It printed my father's initials. It printed mine. By that afternoon, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Calls from numbers I didn't recognize. Texts from family members I hadn't heard from in years. "Uncle Paul, you've done enough damage. Don't show your face around here again. Aunt Mary. I told you this wouldn't fix anything. Amanda. You didn't just expose Dad. You destroyed me." And then, for my mother, "MOMY." That single word broke something in me. I didn't respond. I couldn't. I just sat in my car outside the lake house, staring at the still water. The reflection was perfect that day, too perfect. It was the kind of calm that hides a storm underneath. The next morning, I found the letter taped to my front door. No envelope, just my name scrawled across the top. The handwriting was Amanda's. "You've humiliated this family. Dad's in the hospital, stress-induced heart attack. Mom can't stop crying. Whatever peace we had is gone. You said you wanted truth, but all you've done is destroy what little we had left. I hope it was worth it." I folded the letter and placed it on the kitchen counter. The words blurred together in my vision. Somewhere deep inside, I wanted to defend myself, to say it wasn't my fault, that truth wasn't supposed to be painless. But the echo of her final sentence, "I hope it was worth it," kept circling in my head. That night, I drove to the hospital. I didn't plan it. It was instinct. I just needed to see him, my uncle, not as the villain he'd been painted, but as the man my father had once loved like a brother. When I reached the ward, the nurse hesitated before pointing to his room. "He's stable," she said, "but he doesn't want visitors." "I'm family," I said quietly. She studied me for a moment, then nodded. 5 minutes. He looked smaller in the hospital bed, paler, older. The machines beside him hummed steadily, indifferent to human guilt. His eyes were half open when I entered. "You shouldn't have come," he rasped. "I had to," I said. "I didn't want it to end like this." He gave a faint, bitter laugh. "End? You think this ends anything?" I told the truth. He turned his head toward me. "You told your truth. Not the truth. What's that supposed to mean?" He coughed, his breath shallow. "You think one article can rewrite history? Your father made his choices, and I made mine. Now you've made yours. You've burned down what little peace we had left. And for what? So people could know? People don't care, David. They just want something to talk about over dinner." His voice trembled, but his eyes didn't. "You've doomed us all to be dinner conversation." I swallowed hard. "Maybe that's better than being a secret." "Secrets die," he said. "Shame doesn't." The nurse came in then, gesturing gently that time was up. I started to leave, but he spoke again. "Your father loved you," he said, his voice thin but firm. "Whatever he did, he carried it for you. Don't make the same mistake." I turned to reply, but his eyes were already closed. Outside, the rain had started again, a soft drizzle that made the streetlights blur into halos. I stood there for a long time, watching people come and go, each carrying their own private storms. When I got home, the silence felt heavier than usual. The letter from Amanda was still on the counter. My phone buzzed again, another message, this time from my sister. "Yes, you need to apologize. Not for the truth, for how you gave it." I didn't answer, because she was right. It wasn't what I did that ruined everything. It was how. The next morning, I drove back to my mother's house. She was sitting on the porch when I arrived, her face pale and drawn. She didn't say a word as I walked up the steps. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," I said quietly. She nodded slowly. "No one ever does. I just wanted to stop being invisible." Her eyes softened. "And now you're unforgettable. That's the curse of truth, David. It never leaves you clean." We sat in silence for a while, listening to the wind move through the trees. Finally, she said, "Your uncle will recover, but things won't ever be the same. Not for any of us." "I know," I said. "Do you regret it?" I hesitated. "Every minute." "And not at all." She gave a sad smile. "That's how I felt when your father died." Her words hung between us like confession. There was no comfort in them, but there was understanding. As I left, she called after me. "David, you did what none of us could. Just remember that doing the right thing doesn't always feel right." Driving back, I thought about what she'd said, about how the truth doesn't redeem, it redefines. It doesn't fix what's broken. It changes the shape of the pieces so they no longer fit the same way again. By the time I reached the lake house, the clouds had cleared. The air smelled clean, new. I walked down to the dock and sat at the edge, the wood damp beneath me. For the first time, I wasn't angry. I wasn't sad. I was just empty. I looked down at the water, still as glass, and saw my reflection, older, harder, lonelier. I thought about my father's words in that journal. The water hides many things, but not guilt. He was right. It doesn't hide it. It just teaches you how to live with it. 5 years later, The lake house was no longer mine. I sold it quietly, without ceremony, to a couple from Savannah who wanted a peaceful retreat. That's what the realtor called it, peaceful. I suppose to anyone else it was. To me, it had always been something else entirely, a museum of silence, a mirror that refused to stop reflecting. I told myself selling it was a way of moving on. But standing there for the last time, I realized you can't sell memory. You can only leave it behind and hope it forgives you for walking away. The new owners had already started renovating. The porch had been repainted, the dock replaced. But the water, the lake that held my family's secrets, my father's guilt, and my own, remained untouched. I stood at the edge of it one last time, watching the sun ripple across its surface, and felt a strange stillness in me, the kind that comes not from peace, but from exhaustion. A breeze swept across the water, carrying with it the faint scent of pine and the whisper of years gone by. I thought of my father, my mother, my uncle, and Amanda, all of us bound by blood and mistakes we never fully owned. In the end, the truth didn't free me. It didn't heal us. It simply named what was already broken. And maybe that's all truth can ever do. After the article, life didn't fall apart in one dramatic moment. It eroded quietly. My uncle recovered, but never spoke to me again. My mother's health declined, slowly, like a candle losing flame. Amanda moved out of state with her husband. The last time I saw her was at my mother's funeral 2 years ago. She approached me in the rain, her black umbrella trembling in the wind. For a moment, we just stared at each other, two branches of the same tree that had finally stopped pretending they shared the same roots. "I read your letter," she said. "I never wrote one," I replied. Her lips parted. "I know. That's what makes it worse." She wanted to say something else, but the priest began the final prayer, and whatever forgiveness she might have offered was lost in the sound of rain on the coffin. We didn't speak again. Now, standing by the water, I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. It had taken me weeks to write, a letter addressed to no one and everyone. If you ever find this, know that I never wanted revenge. I wanted belonging. I wanted someone to look at me and say, "We see you, even when it hurts." But families don't say that. They say, "We'll talk later." They say it's complicated. They say everything except the truth. And so we drown, not in what's said, but in what's left unsaid. I weighed the letter in my hand, then knelt down and set it gently on the surface of the lake. The paper floated for a moment, curling at the edges as it soaked through. Then it sank, disappearing into the reflection, one more secret among thousands. I stayed there until dusk. The cicadas began to hum. The world moved on, as it always does, indifferent to human tragedy. Before I left, I whispered the words I had carried all these years, the words I never got to say at the wedding or the funeral or during all the hollow silences that came after. "I forgive you, but I wish you'd invited me when it mattered." The wind picked up, scattering ripples across the surface of the lake, distorting my reflection until it vanished. And in that moment, I understood something my father never did, that forgiveness isn't about who deserves it. It's about who refuses to carry the weight any longer. I walked back to my car, leaving the water behind, and as I turned the ignition, the radio came to life on its own, static, then a familiar melody. A piano piece, slow and mournful, the kind my mother used to hum while she cooked. It played softly as I drove away, the sound fading into the night. The road was empty, the sky a dull gray, bruised with memory. I didn't look back, because the truth, however painful, however permanent, had finally done what silence never could. It had ended the story. If this story touched you, if it made you reflect on the quiet wars within families, take a moment to like, share, and comment your thoughts below. Subscribe for more deeply emotional, tragic, and reflective stories that stay long after the final word fades. Because sometimes healing begins not with forgetting, but with remembering and choosing to forgive.